Ooh, ooh, ooh. Hello, how are you? Hello, how are you? How are you? I'm sorry. This 1, 2, 3. Gonna do the three podcast is what mix sector, mixing it up. But one thing I would like to know. All right, all right, yeah. Yeah.
Ukrainian International Airlines Flight 752 plane crash lawsuit, Airplane Accident Lawyers Canada, Howie Sachs and Henry LLP. Update June 10, 2024, trial decision. The Ontario Superior Court of Justice has ruled that Ukraine International Airlines, UIA, must pay full compensation to the families of victims who perished when Flight PS 752 was shot down over Tehran on January 8, 2020. The decision follows an 18-day trial concluding in January 2024, where the court found UIA negligent for not adequately assessing the risks of operating the flight amid escalating military tensions in the region. The full decision can be found here. Flight PS 752, carrying numerous Canadian citizens and residents, was downed by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard during a period of heightened conflict between Iran and the United States. Justice Jasmine Akbarali determined that UIA failed to address the dangers posed by the volatile situation, including recent Iranian missile attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq. The ruling is significant as it mandates UIA to provide full compensatory damages under the Montreal Convention, surpassing the previous cap of $180,000 USD per passenger. Howie Sachs and Henry, together with CFM lawyers LLP in Vancouver, played pivotal roles. They assumed primary responsibility for representing the plaintiffs, leading the presentation of evidence and conducting numerous cross-examinations during the trial. Their extensive involvement not only spearheaded the case but also alleviated costs for other plaintiff groups who benefited from their efforts. HSH and CFM represented the families of 21 passengers who died in the tragedy. Their work was instrumental in developing critical evidence and successfully holding UIA accountable for its actions. Due to their leadership and dedication, these firms faced significant challenges posed by UIA's defense strategies but were crucial in securing justice for the victims' families. For additional information about the case and the judgment, please contact Paul Miller, pmiller at hshlawyers.com, 416-646-3901. Joe Fiorent, KC, jfiorent at cfmlawyers.ca, 604-331-9521. Jamie Thornback, jthornback at cfmlawyers.ca, 604-331-9529. Update, March 4, 2021. On February 16, 2021, Howie, Sachs and Henry LLP, along with co-counsel Camp Fiorent Mogerman Matthews LLP, appeared before Justice Glustine of the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. HSH and CFM attended in order to represent the interests of our client, Jane Doe, as a proposed intervener in a class action commenced against Ukraine Airlines, the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. As a result of our submissions, Justice Glustine made the following order, which includes 4 significant decisions. Family members will have 2 years from the date of the accident to decide whether they wish to pursue an individual claim against UIA only or whether they wish to be a part of the class action against Iran, as opposed to the 75 days originally proposed. Minors and incapable persons will be allowed to opt out of the class action by delivering an opt-out form signed by a litigation guardian, rather than requiring families to obtain leave of the court and notice to the public trustee and/or children's lawyer. Families who have already retained their own lawyer will be permitted to opt out of the class action by contacting their lawyers and having their lawyers deliver their signed opt-out notice, and Justice Glustine ordered that the class action remove from its notice of certification any claims that class members are guaranteed anonymity through the class action lawsuit, as he found that there can be no guarantee of confidentiality through the class action at this stage. At HSH and CFM, we continue to believe that pursuing claims against Ukraine International Airlines only while working with the Canadian government to hold the Iranian government and military to account is a safer and more effective approach to helping families who have suffered as a result of the downing of UIA. PS 752. We are proud to have represented our clients at the hearing. HSH and CFM will continue to monitor developments in the class action case to ensure that our clients' interests are protected and they do not become entangled with the claims against the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and John Doe missile operator. HSH commemorates the loss of Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752. On January 8, 2020, Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 departed from Imam Khomeini International Airport in Iran at 6:12 a.m. on its scheduled flight to the Kyiv International Airport, Ukraine. A few minutes after takeoff, the Boeing 737-800 aircraft crashed into farmland outside of Tehran, killing all 176 passengers and 9 crew members on board. Of those, 57 were Canadians. Howie, Sachs and Henry LLP's experienced and knowledgeable personal injury lawyers have developed expertise in representing families of victims of international airplane accidents. Howie, Sachs and Henry LLP and Camp Fjord Matthews Mogerman LLP are working together to represent families of the Canadian passengers who were on flight PS 752. Both law firms have lawyers and staff that can assist families in Farsi, and are available to meet with families across Canada, including British Columbia, Alberta and Ontario. Contact us to learn more. One of Canada's top peer-ranked personal injury law firms, Howie Sachs and Henry LLP has built its reputation on handling personal injury cases with the utmost compassion and professionalism. Partner Paul Miller, head of the firm's Mass Torts and Class Actions Group, is co-lead counsel along with Joe Fjord QC of Camp Fjord Matthews Mogerman LLP in the claim against Fly Jamaica for injuries and losses sustained by its passengers on Flight OJ256, as well as co-lead counsel in the 2019 Ethiopian Airlines crash involving the Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft and the claim arising from the 2005 Air France crash at Toronto's Pearson Airport. Camp Fjord Matthews Mogerman LLP represents victims of aviation accidents in Canada and internationally. The firm's success is built on decades of careful, detailed investigation of the root causes of aviation cases. We understand aircraft technology and work closely with leading experts in failure analysis, aeronautical engineering, human factors, air navigation systems and aviation safety to examine all aspects of an accident. If you have lost a loved one in the recent crash of Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752, contact our law firm as you may be eligible for compensation. We are now representing Canadian victims who may be affected by this tragedy, no matter where in Canada you are located. Call us today at 844-972-2375 or email Paul Miller directly at pmiller@hshlawyers.com to discuss your rights vis-a-vis the Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752. We have partnered with the Alberta-based firm Litco Law to assist victims in Calgary, Edmonton and throughout Alberta. Reach out to Litco Law at 1-844-LITCO-4U or visit their website for further details. News coverage. Mistake to include Iran in Ukrainian International Airlines class action, says lawyer, Law Times, March 8, 2021. Search for answers continues 1 year after Iran plane crash, Al Jazeera, January 2021. HSH responds to class actions filed against Iran, HSH blog, February 2020. Why were they flying? Law firms recruit relatives of Iran plane crash victims to sue airline, National Post, January 2020. Paul Miller, personal injury lawyer on suing for Iran plane crash, The John Oakley Show, January 2020. Skilled lawyer ready to help disaster-stricken Ukrainian plane crash, article in Farsi Iran Javan magazine, January 2020. Exclusive interview with Paul Miller, personal injury lawyer experienced in handling several aviation incidents, article in Farsi Salam Toronto Weekly. Newspaper, January 2020. Paul Miller, Why We Have to Sue Ukraine Airlines, article in Farsi Iran Star magazine, January 2020. Kuna Soares Raffle and Paul Miller TV interview, ITC TV interview, January 2020. Cannon Air Force Base PFA's lawsuit to serve as bellwether case. Solve the daily crossword. 28,466 people played the daily crossword recently. Can you solve it faster than others? Crossword. Play on Yahoo.
foam used at Cannon Air Force's lawsuit over the Cannon PFAS contamination will serve as a bellwether case. The state filed the lawsuit last year after firefighting foam used at Cannon Air Force Base seeped into groundwater in Curry County, affecting local dairy farmers. The Environment Department said last week a federal judge made statements that the lawsuit could serve as a test case for other PFAS claims across the country. The state is now seeking a summary judgment in the case where the judge will decide the outcome.
At around 5 in the morning, everything started. The water washed away all the cars, took down this wall, and sent motorcycles and 3 cars over here. Most people here lost their cars. My companion lost his motorcycle too.
Sean, Diddy, Combs trial continues after jury reaches partial verdict. New York, jurors in scene. Diddy, Combs' federal trial told a judge on Tuesday they had reached a verdict on all but one of the charges in his sex trafficking case, which could send the music mogul to prison for life. After more than 12 hours of deliberation, the panel said it had decided on 4 counts of sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution. But it had not been able to reach a unanimous decision on a charge of racketeering conspiracy. Judge Arun Subramanian told jurors to continue deliberating Wednesday, which both the prosecution and the defense supported. It is your duty as jurors to consult with one another and to deliberate with a view to reaching an agreement, he said. Repeating his instructions from Monday morning. Each of you must decide the case for himself or herself, but you should do so only after a consideration of the case with your fellow jurors. And you should not hesitate to change an opinion when convinced that it is erroneous. You're not bound to surrender your honest convictions, the judge added, for the mere purpose of returning a verdict. Combs, who has pleaded not guilty to all charges, hung his head as he sat at the defense table, where his team huddled around him. His eyes followed the jury as they walked into the courtroom to receive the judge's instructions. Earlier, his family and supporters had trickled into the gallery, including his 3 daughters, and Combs had given them a quick wave and an anxious smile. The court was scheduled to be closed on Thursday ahead of the July 4th holiday. But the government said it would give jurors the option of using the court if still needed. The defense agreed that it would be acceptable to continue deliberations on Thursday, if necessary. 2 counts of forcible sex trafficking, 1 for each alleged victim, carry maximum life sentences. 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution each have a maximum 10-year sentence. And a sprawling racketeering conspiracy charge, in which Combs is accused of using a network of trusted associates to carry out and cover up crimes is varied.
Wow.
As arson, kidnapping, forced labor and drug distribution also could put him in prison for life. Unlike the other charges in this trial, racketeering conspiracy requires the government to prove that Combs didn't act alone, but conspired with a group of trusted people, essentially his top staff, to carry out at least 2 illegal acts from a long list of categories, including kidnapping, arson, sex trafficking, physical abuse and drug distribution. Kingsbury reported from Washington.
I think it further polarized Turkish politics, Turkish society. It has further divided people who are supporters of the ruling alliance of the Islamic conservative AKP of President Erdogan and its nationalist MHP allies, and other people who are voting and supporting the secular opposition here in Turkey. I hear that a lot from young people here at this protest, that they really want to see a different Turkey. They don't think the government is solving the country's massive issues, the economic crisis. They also say they feel limited in their personal freedoms, with many restrictions on freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, and they do want to see a different Turkey. And right now they feel like with this crackdown on the opposition, the government, the judicial system is taking away a chance for them to see a different Turkey with a different leadership, and that is creating a certain sense of frustration and despair, especially among many young people I speak with.
Thanks for that, Yulia. Yulia Hahn in Istanbul. Well, much of Europe is sweltering in this summer's first big heat wave. Italy and France have issued wildfire warnings. Temperatures in Spain and Portugal have broken records, while Paris is expected to hit 38 degrees Celsius today and Madrid 39.
The summer sun rises over Paris. Beautiful to look at, but as dawn breaks on the hottest day of the year so far, it's getting hard to bear.
I feel like going inside the fridge or even the freezer.
16 regions across France, including the capital, are on red alert. Hundreds of schools across the country have also been shut. Tourists and locals are struggling to cope.
We are just tourists here, but people that are in the city, living in the city here, and I believe that the city was built more for not to deal with this amount of heat. So it's intense.
Under such sizzling heat, a symbol of the city, the Eiffel Tower, was closed to visitors. And it's not only France. An early summer heat wave is creeping across the continent. Italy has issued heatwave red alerts up and down the country and banned outdoor work during the hottest hours. In Germany, the River Rhine is at unusually low levels for this time of year. As a major shipping route, it's causing concerns about the economic consequences of such extreme heat. Last month was the hottest June on record for many parts of Europe. Temperatures in the Spanish capital Madrid hit the upper 40s.
Today's very bad, but yesterday wasn't any better either. So we're just surviving, nothing more. It's hard to sleep.
England has seen its hottest day so far this year, with some areas experiencing the second heat wave in the last month. Scientists say the extreme temperatures are being caused by a heat dome.
These weather patterns, this heat dome, the waving in the jet stream are things that we've seen before. With climate change, though, we've turned that thermostat, that background temperature up a notch or two. So when we get these weather patterns, one, they tend to happen more often, they're more persistent when they happen, and they're more intense. So we get higher temperatures.
Experts say the world needs to urgently reduce greenhouse gas emissions as frequent weather events become the new normal.
Let's pick up some of those points with Dr. Rachel Cletus, who's Policy Director at the Climate and Energy Programme at the Union of Concerned Scientists in the United States, and she joins us from Belgium. Welcome to DW. So another year, another heat wave, which scientists tell us is being intensified by man-made climate change. Given that that message is now so widely known, why are governments still failing to take sufficient action?
Yeah, as science is showing us, human-caused climate change that's driven by fossil fuels are putting a clear imprint on all countries striking and caused climate change today. The reality is people are paying the penalty through the heat suffering that they're going through right now, the health impact of heat. It's dangerous. Heat is deadly and it's costly. And yet policymakers are still failing to rein in fossil fuels, which are driving.
Okay, so my question really was, why? Why are policymakers failing to take this action?
Honestly, they're in the pockets of fossil fuel companies. It's so clear that they're beholden to boosting the profits of fossil fuel companies rather than taking on the steps that need to be addressed here to make that quicker shift to cleaner forms of energy and also invest in climate resilience so that more communities can endure this kind of heat more safely.
We see this, we'll take the United States as an example. The US, the world's biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, which is now rolling back climate-friendly policies, despite seeing the effects of things like 2017 Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Helene last year. If the US, as the world's biggest polluter, rolls these climate policies back, how does that affect the rest of us?
Well, it's very dangerous. We're seeing in the United States, we have a deeply anti-scientific administration that's pulling back all of the policies that would have advanced clean energy progress. The U.S., too, endured a deadly heat wave last week, just like Europe is seeing this week. And yet Congress just now in the Senate passed a bill that would claw back all of the investments in clean energy that was so hard won. It remains to be seen if this law comes into effect, but unfortunately, the prospects are terrible. And the Trump administration is continuing to attack climate science, take down websites of scientific agencies, try to bury the evidence. All of it is designed to boost the profits of fossil fuel companies.
And do you include the European Union in that? Here in Europe, we have big emitters like Germany. Is the EU failing in its stated commitment to combat the effects of climate change?
The reality is no country is doing enough right now. The U.S. is, of course, in how it's behaving, especially given it.
All right. It looks like the technology has beaten us, Dr. Cletus. Thank you so much for joining us, though. Dr. Rachel Cletus from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Apologies for the quality of that line. We tried. Didn't quite pull it off. We'll take a look at some more news-making headlines around the world now. We'll start in Turkey, where police in Istanbul have detained 4 employees of a satirical magazine over a cartoon that authorities claim depicts the Prophet Muhammad shaking hands with the Prophet Moses. The cartoon sparked an angry protest outside Le Monde magazine's Istanbul office and drew condemnation from government officials. More than 165 international charities and non-governmental organizations, including Oxfam, Amnesty International, and Save the Children, have called for the closure of the US and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. NGOs and witnesses have described a pattern of Israeli forces and armed gangs opening fire on people seeking aid from the group. Thailand's Prime Minister, Paetongtarn Shinawatra, has been suspended from office by the country's constitutional court. Calls for her to resign grew after she was heard criticizing a top military commander during a leaked phone call with a former Cambodian leader. She'll remain in the government in a different position until the court decides whether Ms. Paetongtarn breached ethics. Hong Kong's
What was it doing that for? What's it doing that for?
BBC News Live.
Time for the skinny, and we're starting with the Battle of the Summer Blockbuster.
Yes, so opening today, because it is a holiday week, so they tend to open early.
Whoa! Sugar daddy. Bueno, no importa. Looks like the same. Like this. Back. I thought he was back. Hey, bro. Thought he was back, bruh. It's the door, man, the door, bruh. Windy weather. Windy weather. Windy weather, windy, 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 windy. Windy weather. Oh. I can just go like this. Like this. Search, how you search? Search. Search for the app. Clio. No, not Clio. No. No, this one. That one out, that one out, that one out. That's got the music. Spoil. What's that about? Oh, right. Somewhere, this one. Then up here. Brief. News update. Victoria Fee track. Childcare safety reform. Nothing without power, storm launches. Along that one. Noble. Oh, they're not too. You can play both. The top one first, I think. Okay, top one first.
SBS live streams and podcasts are supported by advertising. Ease into the English language with SBS Learn English.
It's a fun podcast that will improve your English skills and teach you about Australian culture by taking you through everyday situations.
And check out SBS News in Easy English, a daily 5-minute news update for English learners that will expand your vocabulary and help you keep up to date.
Follow SBS Learn English and SBS News in Easy English on the SBS audio app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to SBS News.
In this bulletin, childcare sector reforms to be fast-tracked in Victoria. Indigenous organisations welcome calls for compensation after the release of the final Europe Commission reports. And in sport, Richmond's Tom Lynch suspended for 5 matches. With the latest SBS News, I'm Deborah Groarke. A man has been taken to hospital after being injured in severe storm weather in the New South Wales Southern Highlands. Police say the 55-year-old sustained serious head and torso injuries after a tree fell on his B-double truck in Moss Vale. He's believed to be in a critical condition. The federal government says it will seek new powers to strip childcare centres of funding if they don't meet safety standards. It follows revelations Victorian police have arrested a childcare worker and laid 70 charges relating to alleged sex offences. Education Minister Jason Clare says the government has already introduced a ban on the use of personal mobile phones in childcare centres and changed the rules around mandatory reporting from 7 days days to 24 hours. But Mr Clare says they have no intention of stopping there.
This is serious, and it requires serious action. I was informed about this by the Victorian Government a little over a week ago. It's one of the reasons why I put this on the top of the agenda when Education Ministers met last week.
Meanwhile, Victoria says it will be pushing through a number of its own reforms. Premier Jacinta Allen has ordered an urgent safety review. Extra measures like a ban on mobile phone use and professional registration of childcare workers are due to come into force within months.
Here in Victoria, though, I won't wait. Families cannot wait. More needs to happen now.
A US jury has reached a verdict on 4 out of 5 charges in the sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Coombs, but it remains unknown if they've decided to convict or acquit. District Judge Arun Subramanian says he's been told the jury has decided on 2 counts of sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution, but have not been able to reach a verdict on the racketeering conspiracy charge. Mike Sazak from the Associated Press says the judge has instructed the jury to keep deliberating on that final count.
If the jury reaches a verdict on that count, or if they come to the judge and say after many more deliberations they simply cannot reach a consensus, cannot reach a unanimous verdict, then we will find out what their verdict is on those 4 other counts.
Venezuela's National Assembly has unanimously voted to declare UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk persona non grata in the country. The president of the Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, says the parliament has decided on the rare diplomatic designation, partly because they argue the UN official has failed to protect the rights of Venezuelan migrants deported by the Trump administration to a prison in El Salvador.
Accomplice to murderers, accomplice to kidnappers, and all those who work with him. And let's not return to that office while that garbage is in charge of it.
The Parliament's decision is despite Turk recently urging the US to halt deportations of Venezuelans who may be at risk of arrest in their home country and raising concerns about the lack of due process in mass deportations from the United States. Critics say the ire of the National Assembly appears instead to have been energised by Turk's speech to the Human Rights Council in Geneva last Friday. It also comes just days after Turk said his office has documented increasing arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances and torture under President Nicolas Maduro.
Do they get the right government, the right government, or do they get the right government? Do they get Maduro, Venezuelan? Do they get away with it, or why is it like that? Can they not get rid of Maduro, or is it hard to get rid of Maduro? I think.
Government. A third person has been charged in relation to the alleged murder of 17-year-old Phoebe Bishop, whose remains were found in bushland last month. The 30-year-old man has been charged with 2 counts of accessory after the fact to murder. Police allege he used Ms. Bishop's mobile phone to interfere with the investigation. Indigenous organisations have welcomed the UROC Justice Commission's call in their final reports for compensation for Victoria's First Nations people. Jill Gallagher is the CEO of the Victorian Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, or VACCHO. She says reparations acknowledge the economic inequality caused by colonisation alongside other ongoing damages and trauma.
We don't have access to the bank of mum and dad to help us with a good start in life. Because when our ancestors, and when I say ancestors, I don't mean 3 or 4 generations ago. My mum is still alive and she lived on a mission here in Victoria, and she was not allowed to own property. She was not allowed to create wealth for her family.
To sport, and Richmond forward Tom Lynch has been suspended for 5 matches for a strike against Adelaide's Jordan Butts on Saturday at the MCG. Lynch failed to convince the AFL tribunal to reduce the grading of the impact of his blow. The 32-year-old's ban is the longest this season, eclipsing the 4-game stretch handed to Hawthorn's Connor Nash in April, also for striking. I'm Deborah Groark. This is SBS News.
SBS live streams and podcasts are supported by advertising.
You're listening to SBS News.
In this bulletin, thousands without power as a storm lashes the east coast of Australia. Qantas confirms a cyber breach at a call centre for the airline. And in sport, the Wallabies unveil their new test jersey designed by Wiradjuri winger Dylan Peach. With the latest SBS News, I'm Deborah Groark. Emergency services have taken nearly 750 calls this morning alone as wild weather lashes Australia's east coast. Crews have conducted 7 flood rescues on the New South Wales south coast, all caused by people driving into floodwaters, while an estimated 200 homes on Burrell Lake have been inundated. Endeavour Energy says more than 17,000 homes and businesses from Western Sydney down to the Illawarra are without power, and several flights have also been cancelled from Sydney Airport for the second consecutive day. Helen Reid from the Bureau of Meteorology says the impacts will continue into the evening.
There is a severe weather warning for damaging winds and heavy rainfall, which extends across the New South Wales coastal fringe from Foster to Bega into the alpine areas of parts of the southern tablelands and the northern tablelands as well. Damaging winds remain possible today across the warning areas, most likely this morning, with average gale force wind gusts around 60 to 70 kilometres an hour, with gusts getting up to 90 to 110 kilometres an hour.
Cyber hackers have gained access to data belonging to 6 million Qantas customers after breaching a call centre. The airline says it first caught wind of the attack when it detected unusual activity on a third-party platform used by a Qantas airline contact centre on Monday. Qantas says it's still investigating the extent of the breach but expects it to be significant. But it says no credit card details, financial information or passport details were held in the system that was compromised, and no frequent flyer account details, including passwords, PIN numbers or login details, had been accessed. 5 Australian citizens have flown out of Iran as a ceasefire between the country and Israel continues to hold. The group have travelled on a commercial flight from Mashhad in the nation's northeast to Dubai with Australian government assistance. More than 50 other Australians have successfully crossed the border by land and have been met by Australian officials, while more than 150 have received border codes for Azerbaijan. The Israeli military has acknowledged Palestinian civilians have been killed at controversial aid distribution points in Gaza. The Palestinian Health Ministry has estimated more than 500 have died seeking aid from sites run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, with local medics and witnesses saying 11 people died in the latest incident. Israeli Ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, says his government accepts some civilians have been killed but disputes the number of casualties.
Unfortunately, there were a few incidents, but I can tell you one thing for sure. The numbers that were reported by Hamas were not correct. They were lies. They tried to create the impression that it's not safe and people should not go there, instead of actually showing the real facts. Please.
Hundreds of protesters have clashed with police in Istanbul after a rally to mark the 100th day since former Mayor Ekrem Imamoglu was detained before being dismissed from office. Riot police have pushed protesters back and used pepper spray to disperse them.
How are you going to have Iran win the war? Is Iran losing out, Iran? How do we do that? How do we make peace and make peace.
Plainclothes officers detained those who did not leave the area after the scuffles. The mayor was set to be the key opposition candidate in upcoming presidential elections, and his detention and subsequent arrest on terror charges, which he denies have been likened to a coup. Turkish President Erdogan maintains the courts are independent, but this protester, who declined to give their name, believes otherwise.
We're here today to be against the lawlessness and for the arrested mayors and the animosity of the police against students, for all the country, even for the police, for everyone.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong has met her US counterpart on the sidelines of a meeting of the Quad Alliance in Washington. Senator Wong says she made the case for a tariff exemption for Australia, as well as discussing defence arrangements to counter rising global conflict. She says Marco Rubio did not raise Australia's defence budget, and the discussions were on regional stability more broadly. To sport, and the Wallabies have unveiled their latest test jersey designed by Wiradjuri winger Dylan Peach. The jersey will debut this weekend in time for NAIDOC week and will be worn across the Wallabies' 3-match test series against the British and Irish Lions. Peach says it's a great reminder for rugby fans to try and engage in the First Nations culture on the land in which they live.
I would implore people to, really just acknowledge and research Aboriginal history, because it is such a beautiful thing. Like, we're not asking you to, go over and beyond. Just acknowledge the land you're on is so, there's so much history and so much knowledge throughout it.
I'm Deborah Groark. This is SBS News.
So how you do it? Go over here. Nope. No.
Anthony Albanese finds himself all in on $368 billion a UK-US gamble with Donald Trump, ABC News. Welcome back to your weekly federal politics update, where Brett Worthington gets you up to speed on the happenings from Parliament House. A lucrative, defined benefits, superannuation scheme used to be the hottest post-politics ticket in town. It was the rolled gold version of political pensions, and little wonder it ceased taking new MPs after 2004. Fast forward 2 decades and the AUK-US military pact with the UK and US has to date proven the gift that keeps on giving. Whether it's the architect, former PM Scott Morrison, the politicians turned ambassadors to the US Joe Hockey and Arthur Sinodinos, or former defense ministers Christopher Pine, Joel Fitzgibbon or Brendan Nelson, the AUK-US arrangement has brought with it plenty of private business ventures for them all to pursue. None of this is to suggest any have engaged in anything inappropriate. But it serves as a reminder that it's not just the current government that has skin in the game when it comes to Australia's acquisition of second-hand US nuclear-powered submarines, a deal that could now be at risk as Donald Trump's administration announces a snap review for its America First credentials. Defense Minister Richard Marles, who hand-delivered an $800 million down payment on the subs earlier this year, on Thursday insisted the review was routine business and there was no need for concern. Former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, arguably the biggest critic of AUK-US, sees it as anything but and insists both Labour and the coalition have been in a denial of reality for far too long, a sentiment former Labour PM Paul Keating echoed. AUKUS will be shown for what it always has been, a deal hurriedly scribbled on the back of an envelope by Scott Morrison. Along with the vacuous British blowhard Boris Johnson and the confused President Joe Biden, Keating said. Adding to the mix of ghosts of Prime Ministers past, Anthony Albanese's predecessor.
How? Question. How? You.
Predecessor Morrison found himself in lockstep with government, insisting the US review shouldn't be overinterpreted, even if it is being led by an AUK-US skeptic. There are no shortage of public funds that hang in the balance with AUKUS and without a plan B. Australia has suddenly found itself all in on a $368 billion gamble with the most unpredictable man to have sat in the Oval Office in recent decades. Australia might be about to witness just how artful Trump can be at renegotiating a deal his predecessor struck. Serving sanctions as relations sour. Even before the US review of AUK-US, souring relations with the US administration had put a possible meeting between Albanese and Trump in limbo. On Wednesday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio became the second senior US official in recent weeks to take a swipe at Australia. Rubio argued the move by Australia, Canada, the UK, New Zealand and Norway to issue sanctions against two Israeli government ministers was counterproductive to peace in the Middle East. Mind you, this was coming from an official whose own government isn't sure if it wants to see an independent Palestinian state. Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong described Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich as the most extreme proponents of the unlawful and violent Israeli settlement enterprise in the West Bank, who had ignored international calls and incited extremist violence and serious abuses of Palestinian human rights. While unlikely to have any real impact on either man, Australia argues the sanctions send an important signal about the state of affairs in the Middle East and the urgent need for peace. The opposition, meanwhile, is demanding a briefing on the sanctions and ISAC using labor of improperly using sanctions against members of a democratically elected government. Knights of the Productivity Roundtable. Legend dictates that King Arthur created his famed round table to create a sense of equality among his knights. Without a head to the table, it suggests that all who sit there are equals. It's in that same vein that Albanese is calling together a roundtable with business unions in the public service in the hope of tackling growth and productivity. The whole thing has a whiff of utopia about it, yet there's likely not enough butcher's paper in the world to tackle the problems Albanese once achieved. But you'll be immediately sent to the naughty corner if you dare say the words 2020 and summit in the same sentence. It's not like the underlying issue isn't important. In the simplest of terms, and apologies to all economists, the ultimate aim in boosting productivity is to get a greater output from a lower input. While workers hear it as them having to work harder, governments insist it's about boosting living standards. It remains to be seen if Albanese's August Productivity Roundtable will deliver reforms or be consigned to the dustbin of history alongside Rudd's 2020 summit. But there's no shortage of members of the business community who are still smarting from the Jobs and Skills Summit Labor held in its first term. They argue that was less of a roundtable and more of high table with labor and the unions toasting preordained outcomes decided privately before the summit. A claim labor rejects. Save the date. As Tasmanians ready for yet another election, July 19's poll will be their fourth in 7 years. The writs on last month's federal election have been officially returned to the Governor-General. That milestone starts the clock for what could be one final twist in the battle for Bradfield, the hyper-marginal Sydney electorate that Teal Independent Nicolette Bull won after a recount. The Liberal Party and candidate Giselle Kaptarian are considering whether or not to challenge the 26-vote defeat. They now have 40 days to consider lodging a challenge with the High Court, which acts as the court of disputed returns. Should they lodge a challenge by July 22, it will be the first time a lower house result has been appealed in almost 20 years. Alan finds key to success in lost Liberals. It wasn't that long ago that Albanese was doing as much as he could to avoid public appearances with Victorian Premier Jacinta Allan. Allan leads an 11-year-old debt-laden government that's become increasingly unpopular in recent years. It's an environment that Liberals hoped would deliver big gains for Peter Dutton and the federal party in the state, but it was to no avail with the party setting a new high benchmark for record low performance. The Liberals have been in power in the state for just one term in more than a quarter of a century. On paper, next year's state election should be like kicking into an open goal, and yet the way the Libs are going, they increasingly look more likely to shank it out of bounds on the full. Bitterly divided, the party is spending more time talking about defamation proceedings than they are the government. On Wednesday, the winner of the defamation action, Moira Deeming, offered to delay bankruptcy proceedings against former leader John Pissetto if the party guaranteed her pre-selection in next year's election. By Thursday, it emerged she had been referred to the state's anti-corruption investigators over the proposal. Some Liberals fear if Pissetto is declared bankrupt, and thereby kicked out of Parliament, the party could lose the seat to an independent at a by-election. Just the kind of momentum you need as you head into an election. Australia, UK sanction Israeli ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, ABC News. Australia has issued sanctions against two of the most controversial members of Israel's government, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. accusing the men of inciting violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. In a joint action by the Australian, British, Canadian, New Zealand and Norwegian governments, which has drawn condemnation from the governments of the US and Israel, the pair will face travel bans and have their assets frozen. Foreign Minister Penny Wong said the men had incited extremist violence and serious abuses of Palestinian human rights. Extremist rhetoric advocating the forced displacement of Palestinians and the creation of new Israeli settlements is appalling and dangerous, she said in a joint statement with her foreign colleagues. These actions are not acceptable. We have engaged the Israeli government on this issue extensively, yet violent perpetrators continue to act with encouragement and impunity. You have ignored the international community, says Wong. Mr. Ben-Gvir serves as National Security Minister in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government, while Mr. Smotrich is the Finance Minister. Senator Wong said the sanctions were not evidence Australia was deviating from its support for Israel's security in the wake of Hamas' deadly attacks on October 7, 2023. Today's measures are targeted towards individuals who in our view undermine Israel's own security and its standing in the world, she said. We continue to want a strong friendship with the people of Israel based on our shared ties, values and commitment to their security and future. The minister also noted the sanctions were focused on Mr. Ben-Gvir and Mr. Smotrich's conduct with regards to the West Bank, but argued the measures could not be seen in isolation from the catastrophe in Gaza. We continue to be appalled by the immense suffering of civilians, including the denial of essential aid, Senator Wong said. There must be no unlawful transfer of Palestinians from Gaza or within the West Bank, nor any reduction in the territory of the Gaza Strip. She told reporters on Wednesday the Netanyahu government's actions in Gaza and its granting of impunity for settler violence in the West Bank were extinguishing the prospects of a two-state solution. Together, these countries are sending a message. You have ignored the international community and we do not tolerate it. Outrageous. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar said the Israeli government had been informed about a UK decision to include 2 of our ministers on the British sanctions list. It is outrageous that elected representatives and members of the government are subjected to this kind of measures, he said. I discussed it earlier today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and we will hold a special government meeting early next week to decide on our response to this unacceptable decision. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio condemned the sanctions, saying they do not advance U.S.-led efforts to achieve a ceasefire, bring all hostages home, and end the war. We reject any notion of equivalence. Hamas is a terrorist organization that committed unspeakable atrocities. We remind our partners not to forget who the real enemy is. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said the U.S. and Israeli responses were predictable, frankly. We have continued to express concern about humanitarian issues in Gaza. We've continued to have a consistent position, he told the ABC. Senator Wong said the U.S. government had been contacted, overnight, about the sanctions. There are occasions on which in our alliance with the U.S. we have had differences of views and differences of approach. But obviously there remains a great deal of strategic alignment across many domains, she told the ABC. Mr. Albanese said the matter was not a priority for his discussions with U.S. President Donald Trump on the sidelines of next week's G7 summit. The coalition's foreign affairs spokesperson Michael Akash did not directly criticize the decision but said the sanctions were a very serious development, and that the government should explain the basis for its decision. We are concerned that there is a pattern of decisions by the Albanese government targeting the Israeli government, she said. Senator Cash said the government should clarify the basis for using Australia's Magnitsky-style sanctions regime to sanction individuals, suggesting it would lower the threshold of that system if sanctions were handed out as punishment for objectionable comments. The Magnitsky sanctions regime was designed to respond to serious matters of international concern, such as human rights abuses and terrorist acts. The Albanese government needs to explain why they have seemingly lowered the threshold, she said. While Senator Wong and Mr. Albanese have referred to comments made by Mr. Ben-Gvir and Mr. Smotrich, they have directly linked the sanctions to settlement activity in the West Bank. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich hit back. The pair of Israeli ministers are 2 of the most outspoken far-right politicians calling for the expansion of settlements in the West Bank, which the International Court of Justice ruled were unlawful in 2024. Late last month, the Israeli government announced plans to establish 22 new settlements in the West Bank and legalize some which had already been built without government approval. The pair have also agitated for continuing fighting in Gaza and the return of Jewish settlements in the Strip. Mr. Smotrich has said he would allow not even a grain of wheat to enter Gaza, adding that the Strip would be entirely destroyed during the war. Mr. Ben-Gvir has called for the Palestinian population to be pushed out of Gaza, saying, "We must encourage emigration." He has also repeatedly fueled tensions in Jerusalem's Old City by insisting Jewish people can pray on the Temple Mount, something reserved solely for Muslim worship, and the replacement of the Al-Aqsa Mosque with a synagogue. The National Security Minister also has a number of criminal convictions, including incitement of racism and supporting a terrorist organization. A fortnight ago, the men joined nationalist Israelis marching through the Old City on Jerusalem Day, where some of the participants chanted slogans such as, "Death to Arabs," and, "May your village burn." Senator Wong said the pair were not the only members of the Israeli government whose actions have been problematic, but they are certainly the most extreme. The sanctions were first reported by British newspaper The Times, prompting early responses from Mr. Ben-Gvir and Mr. Smotrich directed at the UK government. "We passed Pharaoh, we will also pass Starmer's Wall," Mr. Ben-Gvir said. "I will continue to work for the State of Israel and the people of Israel without fear or intimidation." Mr. Smotrich said he viewed the decision with contempt. Britain has already tried once to prevent us from settling the cradle of our homeland, and we cannot do it again, he said. We are determined, God willing, to continue building. The UK has sharpened its criticism of Israel in recent weeks, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer foreshadowed sanctions against Israel in a joint statement with Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney and French President Emmanuel Macron. Israel's humanitarian blockade of Gaza has been roundly criticized by leaders, with Mr. Macron labeling it as shameful. Senator Wong told the ABC's News Breakfast the statement, made by several countries acting together to impose sanctions, was as important as the effect of the sanctions. And I think the fact that the countries who have imposed these sanctions are countries who have historical relationships with the state of Israel does demonstrate the level of concern that we have about what is occurring.
Wow. Wow.
Why Republicans are voting against Donald Trump's big beautiful bill, ABC News. With Republican Party majorities in the House of Representatives and the Senate, it would be simple for an onlooker to assume U.S. President Donald Trump would not have any trouble getting laws passed. But as his closest allies struggle to muscle the One Big Beautiful Bill Act through Congress, this idea has been disproved. After an entire day of negotiations and a vote with the narrowest of margins, the president's marquee bill will return to the House for more debate. Here's the latest on the divisive bill and why some Republicans are voting against it. What just happened? U.S. President Donald Trump is getting closer to seeing his One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed after Vice President J.D. Vance cast a tie-breaking vote to pass the bill in the Senate on Tuesday. After a drudge of debate and negotiations that extended over more than 24 hours, 3 Republicans, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, Susan Collins of Maine and Rand Paul of Kentucky, had joined all 47 Democrats in voting against the bill, creating a deadlock of 50-50. Much of the late horse trading was aimed at winning over Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who had signaled she would vote against the bill without significant alterations. What is the Big Beautiful Bill? Its full name is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but it's also shortened to the OBBBA or BBB. In essence, it is a budget reconciliation bill, a tool to fast-track policy around spending, revenue and the debt ceiling. The 1,038-page bill rolls together hundreds of proposed changes, from tax cuts to changes to social benefits programs. What's in it? Here's an overview of some of the key changes put forward in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Experts have warned a single sentence in the bill would weaken the powers of federal judges to enforce contempt when the government defies the court. No court of the United States may enforce a contempt citation for failure to comply with an injunction or temporary restraining order if no security was given. When the injunction or order was issued, the provision says. According to Reuters, security, in this case, refers to monetary bonds that can be used when injunctions are issued. If the injunction is later reversed, the bond helps cover the defendant's losses. The Trump administration argues the provision would deter frivolous lawsuits, but Democrats argue it would leave judges powerless to reign in defiance. On social media, Mr. Trump has claimed the bill would secure funding to develop a network of missile defense systems. The BBB would provide a $25 billion $38 billion initial investment to develop the Golden Dome. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated the cost of developing a sophisticated missile defense system could exceed $500 billion. The bill would also commit $21 billion to restock the U.S. ammunition arsenal and $34 billion to expand its naval fleet. Mr. Trump would revive construction of the wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, which he began during his first term, with a $46.5 billion $70.7 billion injection. A further $45 billion would be allocated to fund 100,000 immigration detention facility beds to support the Trump administration's pursuit to conduct the largest mass deportation in U.S. history. The bill would also set aside $4 billion to hire thousands more Border Patrol and Customs officers, and a further $2.1 billion for signing and retention bonuses. To help pay for it, immigrants would face various new fees. Asylum seekers would be required to pay at least $1,000 on filing an application for asylum. While it would be a first for the U.S., other nations charge a fee for asylum applications, but the costs are significantly lower, $45 in Australia's case. The debt ceiling is a limit on the amount of money the federal government can borrow. The BBB would raise it by $4 trillion $6 trillion to $40 trillion The bill would introduce additional restrictions on Medicaid, a joint federal and state program that helps cover medical costs for millions of elderly, disabled and low-income Americans. That would include a requirement for able-bodied adults with no dependents to work at least 80 hours a month to qualify for benefits, starting December 2026. Republicans argue they are trying to right-size the safety net programs for the population they were initially designed to serve, mainly pregnant women, the disabled and children, and root out what they describe as waste, fraud and abuse. Recipients would also need to reapply for benefits every 6 months, rather than every year. There's also a proposed new $35 United States $53 co-payment that can be charged to patients using Medicaid services. The Congressional Budget Office estimates 11.8 million more Americans would become uninsured by 2034 if the bill becomes law. Republicans also hope to strip Planned Parenthood of funding from Medicaid. As well as providing abortion care, the organization offers cancer screenings, pap smears and birth control. One of Mr. Trump's key campaign promises, to end taxes on tips and overtime pay, would be ticked off by the BBB. The bill would also temporarily increase the Social Security income tax deduction of up to $4,000 United States $6,000 for recipients aged 65 and over. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act would introduce work requirements to able-bodied recipients of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, who do not have dependents. More than 40 million low-income earners rely on SNAP to boost their grocery budgets and access nutritious food options. The Congressional Budget Office estimates 3 million Americans would no longer qualify for food stamps if the bill is passed. The bill would also require states to contribute more to the program, which is partly funded by the federal government. All existing student loan repayment plans would be replaced with just two classifications, a fixed-rate monthly repayment plan over the course of 10 to 25 years, or an income-based repayment assistance program. It would scrap current rules that allow borrowers to temporarily defer their loan repayments due to financial hardship or unemployment. Republicans say the bill is crucial because without it, there will be a massive tax increase after December when tax breaks from Trump's first term expire. The legislation contains about 4.5 trillion United States $6.8 trillion in tax cuts. The wealthiest households would see a 12,000 United States increase from the legislation, which would cost the poorest people 1,600 United States a year. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office analysis of the House's version, middle-income taxpayers would see a tax break of $500 to $1,500, the CBO said. What did the Senate change? One key change out of the Senate was to scrap a provision that would have blocked states from regulating artificial intelligence industries for a decade. House of Representatives member Marjorie Taylor Greene, who initially voted in favor of the bill, later expressed her regret after learning of its inclusion and called on senators to strip it. The Senate voted to do so with a resounding 99-1 vote. To secure Senator Murkowski's vote, a provision was thrown in at the final hours to provide $10 billion annually to rural hospitals for 5 years. Another provision added to court Ms. Murkowski's support would send more food aid funding to Alaska and several other states. The amended bill also stripped out a new tax on wind and solar projects that use a certain percentage of components from China. Why are Republicans divided? Republicans who are critical of the bill each have their own reasons. Some, including Senator Paul, say the bill's provision to raise the debt ceiling is fiscally irresponsible because U.S. debt is already out of control. Independent analyses have found the BBB will add between 2.5 trillion United States $3.8 trillion, and 3.1 trillion United States in debt to the U.S. budget. But the Congressional Budget Office projects that number would be closer to 3.5 trillion United States over the next 10 years. Government debt is already roughly 121% of the nation's GDP and has grown exponentially in recent years to exceed 35 trillion United States dollars. Billionaire Elon Musk has also taken issue with the BBB for this reason, which led to his high-profile falling out with Mr. Trump in June. Meanwhile, Senators Tillis and Collins say they don't support the bill because it would cut funding for Medicaid. What do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years, or 3 years, when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore, guys? Mr. Tillis said during an impassioned speech on Sunday. I think the people in the White House, advising the president, are not telling him that the effect of this bill is to break a promise. What happens next? Because the Senate voted on an amended measure, the bill will now be volleyed back to the House of Representatives for another vote. House Speaker Mike Johnson has pledged to see the bill passed quickly, but that relies on the vast majority of Republicans who initially voted in favor not withdrawing their support because of the Senate's changes. The House of Representatives is currently made up of 220 Republicans and 212 Democrats. But GOP House members including Chip Roy of Texas, Ralph Norman of South Carolina and David Vallado of California have already indicated they won't support the Senate's amendments. The bill first passed the House in May by a vote of 215 to 214. There's also the possibility more changes could be added as Republicans continue their negotiations to get the bill passed. ABC AP.
Are we getting some like proper different fucking language up in this shit right now? What are we getting here? Anyone translate that? Is that just a play on champion? Like, is that the bar, is it? Is that what we're fucking doing now? No, I need to put a drone up. Oh, I have to put a drone up. No. Oh, it's perfect. Oh, no. Oh, you're kidding me, cunt. I have to.
Whoa. 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 That's all, folks. So, folks, from Intermix Sector. So, folks, Intermix Sector, YouTube, subscribe. Alright, bye.